Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل يا رب العالمين. قال المصنف رحمه الله ابن قدامة المقدسي: باب زكاة الخارج من الأرض. He says rahimahullah, the chapter on zakah, on that which comes out of the earth. وهو نوعان, and it is of two types. أحدهما, the first type is of plants and nabat. So here the author rahimahullah, he will talk about the zakah, what is obligatory upon that which is extracted from the earth. And they are of two types. Number one, plants, and number two, precious metals, or things that are like metals that are extracted from the earth. So he says, rahimahullah, he says, فَيَجِبُ الزَّكَاةُ مِنْهُ فِي كُلِّ حَبٍّ وَثَمَرٍ يُكَالُ وَيُدَّخِرُ إِذَا خَرَجَ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ وَبَلَغَ خَمْسَةَ أَوْسُقٍ بِقَوْلِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم: لَيْسَ فِي حَبٍّ وَلَا ثَمَرٍ صَدَقَةٌ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ خَمْسَةَ أَوْسُقٍ. He says, rahimahullah, that zakat is obligatory on plants for all grain and fruit that can be measured by volume, so that you can, so they're measured by volume, and they are stored, وَيُدَّخِرُ, if it is produced from the land and reaches over 5 awsuq in measure. So we'll take it one by one. So for plants, not all plants or not all fruits or vegetables are zakatable. There are a category or a certain type of fruit of plants which are zakatable, and that is, or those are plants which or fruits which are or things, plants, fruits, vegetables, etc., which are measured by volume. Number one, so the first condition is that they must be measured by volume. And what does that mean? Measured by volume, yukal means that, or an example of this is that it is measured by a weight of volume, or a measure of volume. So usually it's in a cup or in a container, and you fill that container up until it is filled, and that is how you sell it. Right? It's not measured by weight, by kilos, or by pounds. Rather, it is measured by volume. For example, milk is something which is measured by volume. Right? Milk is not sold by weight, or by kilogram, or by pounds. Rather, it is sold by liters. Right? By liters, by milliliters. And liters and milliliters are a measure of volume. So as long as it is measured by volume and it is a plant, then it will be considered, that is the first condition, that it is zakatable. And how do we know if this plant is measured by volume? We go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So for example, these days when you buy dates, right, you buy dates at the store, your local supermarket, they will sell you a kilo of dates or 1 pound of dates for maybe $10 or $5, right? But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the way that they would measure dates is they would sell it by volume. So they would have a cup called the sa' or a mud, and they would put the dates in the mud, in this cup, and it was a universal measure called the mud al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they would measure it out and they would sell it like that. So that means that dates are, since dates at the time of the Prophet ﷺ were measured by volume, dates are zakatable. So dates, if you have date palms, then you must pay zakat on those, on the dates, if the other conditions are fulfilled. The next condition is yuddakhiru. Yuddakhiru means that it is something which can be stored. So it is a food item which can be stored. For example, dates can be stored. It can be stored for years, many, many years, without putting in the fridge or the freezer. They have methods of storing it for years, right? They will compress it, they will put some water and they will enclose it in a vacuum sealed way, and it can be stored for a very, very long time, especially when it reaches the age, or when at when it reaches to the stage of tamar, when it's dried. So when it's picked dried, then it can be stored for a very, very long time, right? Also, for example, another fruit that can be stored would be, or another thing that can be stored, like raisins. Raisins are stored, right, and can be kept for a long time. Barley can be kept for a very long time. Right? It's a dry, they dry it and they keep it for a long time. Something that cannot be stored would be, for example, tomatoes. Tomatoes, after a few weeks, maybe 1 week, a few days, it goes bad, right? Tomatoes cannot be stored. You're not able to store it for a long time. So there is no zakat on tomatoes. The next condition is if it is produced from the land that reaches إِذَا خَرَجَ مِنْ أَرْضِهِ. So if it is produced from your land, right? So it must be produced from your land, right? If it is produced from someone else's land and he gifts you a bunch of dates, for example, or he gifts you an entire flock of or an entire field of barley or corn, for example, and you don't own it at the time when the zakat is wajib, and we'll come to that, then it is not, you do not have to pay zakat for it. You do not have to pay zakat for it. Or, for example, you purchase or for example, you sell your garden before the fruits become ripe. Then you don't have to pay zakat on that. You do not have to pay zakat on that. So you have to own it at the time when the zakat is due. وَبَلَغَ خَمْسَةَ أَوْسُقٍ, and it has to reach 5 awsuq. So 1 awsuq is 60 sa'a. And so that means it has to reach over, it has to be 300 awsuq or more. 300 awsuq or more. And this is, it is approximately, some of the fuqaha have mentioned that it is approximately 600 is approximately 653 kgs. 653 kgs. So if you have approximate, and this amount would change for the different type of plants, by the way, but approximately 653 kg. So you would have to be, you would have to be farming a large amount of fruits or vegetables or plants, and it has to reach these other conditions before it would be zakatable. So our normal gardens that we have in our backyards, right? They're not going to be, that is not zakatable, because it's not going to reach such a large volume of crop that we're going to reap every year. And this is based on the author, rahimahullah, he says, is based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ليس في حب ولا ثمن صدقة حتى يبلغ خمسة أوسق. There is no charity, or there is no zakat charity in this hadith. ليس في حب, there is no charity on grain or fruit until it reaches 5 awsuq. And then he, rahimahullah, he goes on to say, والوسق 60 صاع والصاع رطل بالدمشق وأوقية و5 أسباع أوقية فجميع النصاب ما قارب 342 رطلا و6 أسباع رطل. So the author, rahimahullah, he talks about some of the calculations and how to calculate the nisab and how much it is. And he says that 1 wasq is equivalent to 60 sa'. 60 sa'a, and 1 sa'a is equivalent to 1 Damascus ritl, which is a measurement they use in Damascus, and 1 and 5/7 uqiyas. Thus, the nisab is about 342 and 6/7 ratls. ويجب العشر فيما سقي من السماء والسبوع، ونصف العشر فيما سقي بكلفة كالدوالي والنواضح. So he says, and now he is going to talk about how much zakat do we have to pay. Right now, for example, we have a date garden, right? And it is producing dates, and it's a large amount. It's over the nisab. How much zakat do we have to pay on it? So he says the zakat must be paid is 10% of the entire crop for that which is watered by rain or water sources that flow to the land without effort from the grower. So meaning that if the garden is naturally watered, for example, you rely on the rain and that is enough, and you're relying on like some waterways or some rivers or some sources of water which are natural, and you don't have to make effort. You don't have to go and actually bring water and water the plants. So if they're naturally watered, then it is 10%, which is due. And 5% for what has been irrigated with effort, such as bringing water by irrigation equipment or on the backs of camels or any other beast of burden. So for example, if you have cows and you have to load them up with water, or you have camels and you load them up with water and then you take them to the garden, to the plants, or you have some sort of machinery, or you have to make some sort of effort. You have an irrigation system, for example, you had to make effort for that, right? So you had to physically bring the water somehow, then it would only be 5% of your entire crop that you would pay in zakat. Then he says, وَإِذَا بَدَأَ الصَّلَاحُ فِي الثَّمَرِ وَاشْتَدَّ الْحَبُّ وَجَبَتِ الزَّكَاةِ. And the zakat becomes obligatory when the fruit starts to appear ripe and the grain has matured or it has hardened, right? So for different fruits, there would be a different indication or sign that that fruit is ripe. For example, for dates, we know that dates become ripe when the taste becomes more sweet and the color starts to change and it becomes more soft, right? For different things, for example, for grapes, it turns black, right? Or it turns darker in color. For some fruits, you'll know that it's ripe from the taste. So when it becomes ripe, when it starts to ripen, that is when the zakat is due. And for grain, when it has matured, so when it becomes hardened and when it becomes ready to use, then the zakat becomes wajib upon you for that. ولا يخرج الحب إلا مصفى ولا الثمر إلا يابسا. And one does not set the grain aside as payment for zakat until it has been threshed, and likewise for the fruit until it has been dried. So the grain, it must be mature, right, before you pick it and you give it out as zakat. And for the fruit, it should, or for dates, it should be, for thamara, for fruit, it should be dried, or it should be ready to eat, and you should not pick it before it has reached the final stage of ripeness. ولا زكاة فيما يكسبه من مباح الحب والثمر ولا في لقاط ولا ما يأخذه أجرة لحصاده. And he says, rahimahullah, there is no zakah on the one that collects for the permissible uses of grains, fruits which grows in the wild without cultivation, items that have been found or picked up, or wages for harvesting. So, for example, if there is you go and you see in the middle of a desert or in a forest or somewhere, right? You don't own it, but it's permissible for you to take from the fruits, right? So you go, there's a waqf, for example, or there is a place where no one owns and there's a lot of fruits there, and you take the fruits, you go and you take it, and you take a lot of it and you take it back home. There is no zakat for that because that you do not own that. And number two is that if you have found something or you picked it up from the ground, then there is no zakat for that as well. So if you found it, right, it's not yours. The most important thing is that it's not your fruit, you don't own it, right? Then there's no zakat for that. And also for wages. So for wages, for example, if you're working, there's a type of partnership where an owner of a farm, he will say, I need a worker. And he will make a contract with that worker, and that worker they will agree that, okay, the owner says, I will give you 10% of the harvest from this crop, right? Now, 10% of that harvest, right, it may be a big amount. It may pass the nisab amount. But if it's your wage and you've been working for that, then there is no zakat for you. There is no zakat for you from the crop. Then he says, وَلَا يُضَمُّ نِصْفٌ مِنَ الْحَبِّ وَالثَّمَرِ إِلَى غَيْرِهِ فِي تَكْمِيلِ النِّصَابِ فإن كان صنفا واحد مختلف الأنواع كالتمور ففيه الزكاة. So he says that one kind of grain or fruit is not added to the other to complete the nisab. So if we said that the nisab is 300 is 300 sa' or 5 awsuq. For example, you have one type of fruit which is about 100 sa', and you have dates which is 100 sa', and you have some barley which is 100 sa', right? So all three, right, collectively it equals to 300 sa', which is the nisab, but they are different. So you do not add them and you say, okay, well, now I have to give zakat because I have 300 sa'. If they are different type of if they're different type of fruits or different type of plants or different type of crops, then you do not add them together to get the nisab. However, if they are the same type of crop, but it is a different variety of that same type, then it is added. For example, dates. There are many different types of dates. There is sukri, there is ajwa, there is khulas. So for example, you have 100 sa'as of sukri and 100 sa'as of ajwa and 100 sa'as of khulas dates. Then you would have zakat because they are all dates, but they are different type of dates. So they are all dates, and since they are all the same, it's the same main harvest or crop, then you would add them together and you would have to pay zakat. وَيُخْرِجُ مِنْ كُلِّ نَوْعٍ زَكَاتَهُ وَإِنْ أَخْرَجَ جَيِّدًا عَنْ رَدِيٍّ جَازَ وَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ. And he concludes by saying that the zakat, one must pay zakat from each kind. So the example we gave, that a person has 100 sa'as of ajwa, 100 sa'as of khulas dates, and 100 sa'as of sukkari, right? He must take that, they are 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 each, right? He must take the zakat 1/3 from this one, 1/3 from the ajwa, and 1/3 from the khulas dates. So you must take 1/3 of each kind. Now, when we look at the types, perhaps there is one type which is more valuable than the other. For example, khulas dates are cheaper than sukkari and cheaper than ajwa dates. Ajwa may be the expensivest out of all of them. So if he takes his zakat from ajwa, all of it from ajwa, and he doesn't do the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, then that is permissible and he is rewarded extra. He deserves an extra reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. However, he is not allowed to pay all of the zakat from the lesser value of the three, or the lesser value of the different types of harvest that he gets. he is allowed to pay its proportionate amount, or he can use the best one and pay for all of them using the best one. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.